So we are at the top of 19A. Get more light in here. Okay, so we're continuing our discussion about, you guys can hear me, right?
Yes, loud
Okay,
and clear.
we're continuing our discussion about sraros, which is indirect damage. By Ravashi, so we're on the fourth line, 19A. By Ravashi asks, Yeshino l'tzraros l'rvia nezek, is there a room to say that there can be an abnormal, unexpected kind of indirect damage, and that would make you liable for only a quarter damage, or not? Okay, so in other words, since for Tzoros in the first place, you only pay half nezek, right? But Tzoros is like a normal thing that happens, right? I mean, maybe and the reason that, according to this view, that you only pay half nezek is that it's indirect. But what if you have a situation where there's also an issue of it being abnormal, right? Something unexpected or unusual occurs, which also is a factor which takes something from paying full damages to half damages. Now, in this case, the original liability is only half damages. So if it's also unusual, unexpected, do you have that? So it would make it a quarter damages or not? Maybe we can answer it from one of Rava's statements. Why Rava asked, Yesh ha'ada l'tzoros or ein ha'ada l'tzoros. Maybe this is what Rava was asking when he asked if you can become a muad for tzraros, if it can become something that you do have to watch out for because it's happened before. But that would imply that there's no issue of abnormality, right? Because because if you only pay a quarter for like this unusual Tzoros, then certainly you pay only half damages for abnormal Tzoros that have become muad. So the Gemara answers, maybe Rava was just making this a hypothetical. Like even if you say even if you say there's no issue of having abnormal things happen, and so even if you say that there's no consideration of shinoi of being abnormal, still you could ask hada or ein hada. Would you become a muad or not? So we don't another answer that question. Rashi asked another question. Koch kocho. What if it's an extra level of indirection? So we've discussed this yesterday, right? The animal causes something to happen, and that thing causes something else to happen. A Rube Goldberg type of situation. According to Simchus, who says that you pay full nezek for tzraros. So what about this indirect cause? Is that the same rule or not? Is it like there's just a gamir halacha means halacha Moshe Sinai that tzraros, that the damage caused by kicking up pebbles that's just the rule. It's halacha Moshe Sinai. It's not derived from the logical assumptions about could it be expected or not. It's halacha Moshe Sinai that kocho, meaning tzraros, meaning indirect damage, is full nezek. And so you would say the same thing applies to another level of indirection. Maybe it's just logical. It's not halacha Moshe Sinai. Taken. So again, we don't know. Okay, so now back to the Mishnah. The Mishnah said if the animal was kicking, or if pebbles were shooting out from under its feet, from underfoot, and those pebbles broke some, that's a half nezek situation, half damage. So now the Gemara is going to investigate that statement of the Mishnah. What is the Mishnah trying to say? If the animal was kicking and kicked something directly, or pebbles which shot out by its regular, as it's normally making its way along the path. That's Chatzin Nezek. Rabbanan, here took the rabbis as opposed to Simchos. Dilma, Haiston Vuetas Vizika Viuta, Otsroros Machmas Biut. Or is the Tzoros in the Mishnah referring to that it's the kicking, not normal walking, but the kicking that caused the pebbles to fly out and cause the damage? Then that's the case of Mishalim Chatzin Nezek. That's when you pay half. Haki Orche, but if it's just walking normally and as a result it causes indirect damage, then Mishalim Nezek Shalim. So that would be a case of, that would not be what the Mishnah is referring to, and that would be like a regular Karen, right? Not that would not be. In other words, is the indirection from normal walking, or is the indirection from kicking, from something that intends to cause damage? Umane sumchosu, and then this Mishnah would be like sumchos, right? Because the assumption is that tzoros from regular walking, you're chayiv nezek shalim, and that's sumchos. Tashma miseifa. So let's look at the rest of the Mishnah. Darsa ala kli v'shavarto v'nafal hashever al kli acher shvaro. If it stepped on a kli and it broke, and then a shard went out and broke something else, right? So that sounds like what? It sounds like normal walking, right? So on the indirect damage, you pay only chatzi nezek, half of the damage. And if you want to say the Mishnah is like simchos from islay chatzi nezek, simchos says indirect damage is always full damages. So maybe you want to answer that this last statement in the Mishnah is trying to say that for the first one, when it says the first thing, it means the first thing to be damaged, not the thing that it stepped on, but the first thing that is damaged by the flying pebbles, or in that case by the flying shards of the thing that it broke. And when it says the second one, it doesn't mean. So it's not talking about the first vessel and the second vessel. It's talking about two things that were damaged by two shards of the damage of the one that was directly damaged. So the ox steps on a on a vessel, and two shards fly out. The first one hits item A, and the second one hits item B, and there's a difference, right? V'shani le'simchu has been kocho kocho. And then you could say, 1 second. Oh no, there's a chain. Sorry, I mistranslated that. There's a chain reaction here. There's the thing it steps on, the first thing that gets damaged by those shards, and then the shards from that second thing damage a third thing. And Sumchus would say that there's a difference. But when does Sumchus say you pay nezek shalim? Only in the case of the first instance of indirection. But if there's another level of indirection, then you go to chati nezek. But we can't say that. We just asked, Ravashi just asked, what about that very case, right? Does Sumchus say that it's only the first level of indirection that pays nezek shalim, and subsequent levels of indirection pay half nezek? Or does he say no, that all levels of indirection pay nezek shalim? Ravashi asked that. So this would answer his question. We said that we don't know the answer, but if our Mishnah is talking about that very case, then our Mishnah answers the question. If our Mishnah is according to Simchos, so Gemara says, well, Ravashi Karabanan Mokela. Ravashi doesn't understand. Indeed, doesn't understand our Mishnah this way. Ravashi thinks that our Mishnah is the rabbis who disagree with Simchos. And this is what he's asking. If the animal was kicking and it damages something, or it's walking along and causes indirect damage, that's half damage. So what is the Mishnah telling us? That if If it kicked something intentionally and that thing caused indirect damage, that would be quarter nezek. Um, uh, or Dilma, or maybe the Mishnah means our question on the Mishnah would be, is it that, or Dilma Haisam Vatas Vizika B'viuta Otsor Smachmas Biut Chazinezek? If it was kicking and damaged something, or if it even indirectly from the kicking he pays half damage, Vein Shinoi, and then there's no issue that we don't consider whether it's abnormal or not. That is what the question on the Mishnah is. Take us. So in other words, we can't prove from this whether the Mishnah is like the rabbis are like some of us. Bava answers, he asked either Rabbi Yami or Rabbi Chia. But here's the question. If you're walking in a place where it's a given that there's going to be pebbles flying, so you're walking on like a gravel road or something, and so it's obvious and unavoidable that there's going to be throwers, that their pebbles are going to be flying. So Ubata, but then the animal intentionally kicked something. Vitiza and pebbles flew out. Vizika and then the damage. Mahu. What are you going to say here? Kevin the Eshala Archehu. Since you know that there's going to be pebbles flying, right? So even though this particular pebble flew as a result of a kick, right? But still, I mean, when you think about it, like, why is there a difference between Nezek and Chasi Nezek? Is it expected? Does the owner have to take precautions, right? But on the gravel road, when you know that there's going to be pebbles flying just by regular walking, and so there would be your responsibility is diminished, and you only pay Chasi Nezek, even if the animal on that road deliberately kicked something and that caused this particular pebble to damage something. It still doesn't matter. Like, the owner is responsible for things, for pebbles that go flying on this path, whether it's intentional or not. Odilma, or maybe not. Hashem miha machmas biut. Come on, Sotros, look at the reality, right? You got lucky. Walking on the path didn't cause any damage, didn't cause any pebbles to fly that caused damage. This particular kick, which is an intentional act of the animal, which you do have responsibility to watch out for, this happened to cause the damage. So that's how you look at it. Teku, so we don't know. Gemara again does not come up with the answer. But I mean, there were observed, or Yirmias. The animals walking in Rishus Harabim, in the public domain, and kicked something, and pebbles. This happened. Pebbles broke something on the public domain. Lekaren mendamin lebechayavis is this Karen, and so the owner is responsible. Adilma tolada de regel hu ptura. So it was kicking, and that's regel, right? So Amarle, so he answered, Mistabra told the regel hu. I think it makes sense to say that it's regel because the animal intentionally kicked. Now, what happens if the kicking took place, the pebble flew out of Rishus Harabim, the public domain, into a private domain, and that's where it caused damage, right? Where we have different rules. So, but here it crosses the boundary, right? Is it where the kick occurred or where the damage occurred? Akira ein kan hanacha yeshkan. He asked a question like, Akira Yeshkan, you have a situation here where the kick was like, you're liable for the kick because it's in the public domain, right? But Hanacha Yeshkan, but would you say that there's liability for it landing in Rishus Yachid? Like, assuming that, like, if you're not liable for the kicking, where the projectile originated, because that was in Rishus Harabim, then how could you be liable for it landing, even though it lands in a place where you would be liable? Ace Facer Rami asked, well, wait a minute. We have another source that says if it was walking on the road in Rishus Harabim, or anywhere, if it was walking and kicked up pebbles and something got broken, this source says whether it's in the private property or public domain, you're liable. My love Itiza Rishus Rabim, Vizika Rishus Rabim. So this appears to be, it doesn't appear to be talking about a crossover situation. It's talking about whether the whole thing happened in the public domain or whether the whole thing happened in the private domain. You're still chayav. So Rosh says, "Lo, he chooses Rishus Rabim, Vizika Rishus Yachid." No, maybe it's talking about exactly our case. It is a crossover. Maybe it's talking about exactly our case where it originates in the public domain and something flies into the private property, and that's where it's telling you you're chayav. So that answers your question. But wait, this you just said. We just quoted a source where he said, like, there's no liability for the taking off of the pebble. So how can there be liability for the landing of the pebble in Rishus Yachid? Like, so how does this make sense? Like, or why are you asking that question where you have an explicit source, according to you, that maybe this is what it's telling you? That yes, that you are chayav then. Amalei Hadribi. He says, "Oh, that was then. This is now." I asked that question. Indeed, I asked that question. Then I found these sources or this other source that answered my question. That yes, indeed, when there's a crossover situation, you are chayav. Like, so, don't pay attention to what I said before. I changed my mind. Esvei. So then he asked the following: Darsal akli ushavarta. If it directly stepped on a vessel and broke it, and then there was an indirect cause of damage to another kli. So al rishon mishalim nezek shalim, v'al achron mishalim chasi nezek. You pay full damages for the first one and half damages for the second one. Tani Allah and the Brisa taught about that. That only applies in the private property of the damaged party. But if it happened in public property, al harishon petura v'al achron chayeves, then you're not even responsible for the first one that it stepped on, because it's in Rishus Harabim, and you're only liable, for the second one, for the one that the shards flew into Rishus Hayachid, into the private property, and broke it. Broke something else. My love, Hitiza Rishus Harabim, Vizika Rishus Harabim. So aren't we talking about? So maybe we could explain this as no, it all happened in the public domain. So there's no, no, exactly. It's talking about exactly our case, that it crossed the boundary from public to private property. But didn't you say that? Well, how could there be such a liability? Because yes, it took off in the public domain where you're liable, but it landed in the private domain. Amalei Hadribi. Yeah, same thing, same answer. I changed my mind. Any. So Rabbi Yomi has asked the same question. Is that right? That you're not liable for the indirect damage of pebbles flying out in Rishus Harabim? Rabbi Yochanan, but then Rabbi Yochanan say, "Ein chasin nezek chaluk lo Rishus Yachid lo Rishus Harabim." You don't have any difference, according to Rabbi Yochanan, excuse me, between private property and public property. My love, so isn't he talking about he's a Rishus Harabim, Zika Rishus Harabim? Isn't he talking about, like, there's no difference between when damage occurs in the public domain or in the private property, right? So Rabbi Zera would say, "Lo, he's a Rishus Harabim, Zika Rishus Yachid." What Rabbi Yochanan is saying is exactly our case, where it crossed the boundary from public to private. It's still going back to the statement, but you said, right? And the service says, I changed my mind. Or you can say that maybe in this case, the statement of Rabbi Yochanan isn't even talking about Sraros. Rabbi Yochanan like Karen. Rabbi Yochanan was talking about direct damage and not about indirect damage. Okay. Yosef Rabbi Yehuda Nasi Rabbi Oshai Akila to Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda Nasi and Rabbi Oshai were sitting at the doorway of Rabbi Yehuda. Nafak Milsa B'Midinayu, and this is what they were talking about. B'shib Kishkasha biznava. What if an animal damages something by wagging its tail? What about that? Nezek shalim, chasi nezek, or what? So the other one says, like, how can you be responsible for the tail, right? So if you envision Karen, why is it called Karen? Because the model is it damages something with its horn, right? So how do you control that? Well, if you're the owner of the ox, you should lead it in such a way so that you can control its head movements and the horns, right? But what can you do about the tail? Like, an animal has a tail, you're leading the animal, you don't have any option here. You don't have, like, we're not going to say clearly that you can't walk your animal from place A to place B. That would be completely impractical, right? So we have to assume that the public policy dictates that people should be allowed to take their oxen from place A to place B. Um, but so then the damage caused by the tail, which you as the owner are unable to control, you should be exempt. Um, so the other one says, well, what about Karen? Like, why are you expected to be able to control the animal's horn? So then you say, what, really? Karen love okay. Karen, it's not normal for the animal, like most animals walk around without damaging things with their horn. Oh, okay, but swishing your tail, wagging your tail is normal. All right. So if you're saying that it's a normal activity, so then, like, we know the answer. If there's a normal activity, so what are you even asking about? So the answer is kishkush yiserim vile. It's talking about abnormal wagging, like it's particularly frisky, right? So ordinary tail wagging, maybe you're not responsible for, um, but unusually intense tail wagging activity is a different story. And the other one would say, no, that, like, tail wagging is tail wagging. You don't distinguish between mild and extreme tail wagging. It's all of the same piece. What if it's swishing not its tail, but its sexual organ? Minan mide de hava Karen. Do we say it's the same thing like Karen? Karen loved Yitzra kataki fillet. It's not that it's like in heat. So you can imagine if the animal is in heat or is in some way aroused. So, like, that doesn't apply to Karen, right? That only applies to, in other words, if it's using its head to hit something, maybe we consider that somewhat intentional. Sorry, the other way around. That Karen, it's like it intentionally swings its head, right? It's doing it on purpose. Do we say the same thing about its sexual organ? Karen in the case of Karen, when it swings its head and butts something with its horn, it's doing it on purpose. But maybe this is considered um, an autonomous response. Like if it's in heat or something like that, then it's not trying to damage. It's got some other motivation, right? So maybe it's different than Karen. Teiku says, don't know. We're not going to answer this question either. Okay, and the last piece of the Mishnah. Chickens, like, are normally they're always can be expected to walk around and break things. And then the Mishnah says if something was tied to its legs, um, and it breaks things because of the rope or something that's dragging around, then that's not muad. That's considered chatinase. That's only if the chicken's walking around the yard, there's a rope lying around the yard, somehow gets tangled up, and the rope damages something. But if you tied a rope to the chicken's leg, then you're liable for full damages. Like you're the cause of it, as it were. Um, and that's more like Tosfos explains. That's more like bor, right? That you have created a hazard in the public domain by tying a rope to this poor chicken. Now, who is liable? The owner of the chicken or a third party? Maybe a third party tied the rope to the chicken's leg. Who's responsible? Um, Hechidai. If you say that who's liable, the owner of the rope or the rope that's attached to the pail that caused the damage. So what's the case? Ida atzne. Um, if if you're you put you put the bucket away in your barn and somehow the chicken got in and got it, honestly, then it's not your responsibility. That's accidental. But if you left the pail lying around in the yard and that's how the chicken got tangled in it, poshehu, then you're negligent. Ella chayav bal tarnagol. So it must mean, like, so what's the situation which you would pay only half damages? So it must mean we're talking about the owner of the chicken. Maishna kule nezek delo. Um, why are you not liable for full damages? Tichsiv, because we're talking about bor, kif tach ish bor, v'lo shar bor, because bor is only applicable to people, right? Kif tach ish bor, the Torah says, if a man digs a pit, right? So, but if an ox digs a pit, or he doesn't actually dig the pit, but gets it, an animal, causes a situation that we can categorize as bor, that doesn't that then so that then you're not liable in that case for bor. So chasin name ish bar lo shar bar. But then uh, but the same should apply to the case of chatzin nezek that results from a bor. Alamasnisin bide adye aduye. The Mishnah is talking about where the chicken is swinging the article around actually by the rope. Okay, so it's like an extension of the chicken's body. The chicken's kind of intentionally causing damage through the rope and the pail that's attached to it. And what Rav Huna says, that when he said that's only if it got tangled by itself, but not if it was uh, um, not if it was done by a person, not if it was attached to the chicken by a person. What he was commenting on, or he was remarking on, was not our Mishnah, but he meant a more general case. Dalil hefker. What if the pail is hefker, right? It's not owned by anybody, and it's attached to the chicken's leg, and you trip over it and hurt yourself. It says that depends. If it got attached, if it became entangled by itself, then there's no liability. But kashara adam chayav. But if you took this hefker pail and rope and tied it to the chicken, then you become responsible for it. Mishum Achayev, so the Gemara says why? Like, what kind of damage is this that you're responsible for? Mishum Boro Hamisgalgo Behema. This is the case of a moving boar. So there are things that are classified as boar, but they're not. They're not stationary. They're moving. So what he's saying, even though this is moving around, it's still classified as boar. Even though when you say boar, you seem to imply something stationary, a stationary object that can cause damage. But what Rafuna is saying is this can also apply in this case, as in this case, to a non-stationary object. This hefker pail that's tied to this chicken's leg is classified as bor. Okay. Now the next Mishnah, we turn to Shane. So Shane is when the animal eats something. Basically, it is eating something along the way, and that is how it causes damage. And we said that's muad. So the Mishnah asks, "Kate to the Shane muedes." In what case? Like, what is the? Let's get into the details of how Shane becomes muad. It's always expected to do that damage, and so you're liable for full damages. We only classify something as Shane, as a muad, if it's eating something that it usually eats, right? Something appropriate food. For example, habehema moedas lechol peros virakos. For example, fruits and vegetables, right? Animals walk by, a bin of cabbages. They're going to eat the cabbages. But if the animal tries to eat something that's not really edible for it, like clothes or vessels, and tries to eat them, that is unusual, and that's not shame. That is chatzi nezek. It's only half damage. But and this only applies in private property. But in the public domain, you're not, for such a case, you're not even liable at all, because the risks of having your items out in private property, you assume greater risk. But if the animal appeared to enjoy, or got some nutritional value from this unusual thing that it ate, then you do have to pay for the value of that benefit. So, what the Mishnah is saying here is, if the animal, kind of lapped up some gold dust, right? So and there's some nutritional value in that, or it appeared to enjoy what it was eating, you don't have to pay the value of gold, which is the damage, or the value of the damagee. You have to pay like only the value of what an ox would eat. Okay, so the Mishnah explains, how does that work? If it ate, normal food in the middle of the street, you pay what you pay what you benefit. So you ate cabbages, you got the benefit of cabbages, you pay the value of cabbages. If you ate from the side from the street, so it was like over in the corner, also you pay what you damage. And if the storekeeper, puts out his wares on the sidewalk, and that's public property, again, you pay for what you ate. But if the animal wandered into the store, then you pay what you've actually damaged. So if it ate something expensive, you pay the higher value of that thing. Tanaraban, we have a brisa. Hashem the brisa expands on what we said in the Mishnah. An animal that goes into the property of the damaged person, and it ate cabbages, ate normal food, or drank normal things to drink. You pay full damages. Also, if you have an undomesticated animal that wanders into private property, and you have the lion, and the lion wandered in and killed and ate a goat. Then the lion's owner has to pay full damages. Or if a cow wanders into your property and eats your barley, or a donkey eats whatever kind of vegetation this is, karshinin, or a dog laps up oil, or a pig got hold of a steak and ate it. They all pay full damages. Amar Papa. So Papa says, now that you've said in this brisa that anything that's unusual, and the animal eats something that's not normal, and that's considered eating. What if a cat eats dates? Or a donkey eats fish? So, it's normal eating. The food might be an unusual food for it to eat, but you still would consider. It seems like we're considering that this would be nazik shalim. So Hauchamra, there was a case of a donkey. The achal nama upalse lasala. It ate some bread, and it also chewed up the basket. Rav Yehuda says for the bread you pay full damages, but for the basket, which is not edible, or it's not a normal thing for it to eat, you only pay half. But why? Like you think that like donkeys don't have good table manners, right? If it's normal for the donkey to eat the bread, then it's also normal for it to damage the basket in the process, right? It's not like they're using a knife and fork. So Gemara says, no, we're not talking about simultaneously. The donkey daintily, eats the bread out of the basket, and when it finishes the bread, it attacks the basket. So that's why you would be liable for chasi nezek for the basket and not full damages. Wait a minute. The whole premise here is like donkeys don't eat bread. What's this case where the donkey eats the bread? And if it's an abnormal food, why is it paying nezek shalim? Raminu, here's a source that describes the donkey's diet. If a donkey eats, human food, basically bread or stew or meat, you only pay half damages. My love of behema. Now, what are we talking about? We're not talking about a domestic animal, right? A cow or a donkey. Lo, Bachai says, no, that source is talking about a wild, an undomesticated animal, which will eat, anything. It'll eat food like there isn't, it's not on a grain only diet. It'll eat what it finds, and that's its normal eating. So chaya basar orchehu. Gemara says, really, is that the case? If it's an undomesticated animal, that's normal. So in that case, why only half damages? Excuse me. That doesn't fit the case. Our answer is the mitveh. We're talking about cooked meat, right? And that it is normal for for the undomesticated animal to eat roasted meat. Or you could say it's talking about not like a lion. We're talking about a deer, right? We're talking about an undomesticated animal that is not carnivorous. So if it happens to eat your meat, then that's unusual, and you only pay half nazir. Or you could ask for liola bibehema. No, you could say even if you're talking about a domesticated animal, ubipsara, we're talking about where the bread was on the table and not in the trough where it usually eats from. So that's the unusual nature of it, that it went up to the table and ate off the table, which it doesn't usually do. Okay, so we can stop here, and David will pick up tomorrow with more cases.
Thank you. Have a good day, everyone.
You too.
Thank you.